Hello, I hope you are doing well and that you and your family are safe during this time that we're apart. We certainly here at the office look forward to the time that we can all be together again and worship together again. But we hope that you're enjoying the resources that we're able to provide you online. And I just wanted to take some time to share some devotional thoughts with you about contentment and purpose. In his teachings during his ministry on earth, Jesus talked about one thing more than any other. His favorite topic was the nature of the kingdom of heaven. 31 times in the book of Matthew, Jesus uses the phrase, the kingdom of heaven. And it's important to note that when he talks about the kingdom of heaven, he uses it in the future tense, but he also uses it in the present tense. The kingdom of heaven is more than just a future hope. It is a present reality. And Jesus taught how to be part of the kingdom of heaven right now. These teachings of Jesus don't focus on going home to some future glory, but on home being in the here and now, what will bring glory to God and what will accomplish God's will on earth as it is in heaven, not looking to kingdom come, but being kingdom now. In the parable of the lost son, the prodigal, we can gain some insight about home being, about what it means to be at home in a world that is not our home. What was missing in the life of this alienated son that caused him to throw everything away and seek to fill his empty life with earthly pleasures? I want to suggest to you today two things that he lacked in his life. He lacked contentment and he lacked purpose. Let's consider the lack of contentment for a few minutes. The young man cannot see that everything his father has now and everything his father will ever have is his. Discontent is a stealer of joy. It results in covetousness, greed, materialism, bitterness, and jealousy. Benjamin Franklin once said that content makes poor men rich. Discontent makes rich men poor. Paul talks about contentment in Philippians chapter 4, beginning in verse 11. He says, "For I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want." And what is his secret to being content? He answers in the next verse when he says, "I can do all this through him who gives me strength." It is Christ that is the secret to contentment, finding all we need in him. Paul expounds on this idea in 1 Timothy chapter 6, beginning in verse 6, when he writes, "Now godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and clothing, with these we shall be content." Do you think that the prodigal son living at home with his father had enough to eat? Do you think that he had clothes to wear? Paul said, "With these we shall be content." Lack of contentment was the original sin of Adam and Eve. They were not content with the provision of God. They were not content with the protection of God. They were not content with the presence of God. They were destroyed by coveting the power of God. They could not find contentment, even in a perfect home created by God just for them. And like Adam and Eve, the prodigal failed in contentment. But he lacked more than contentment. I think the lost son lacked purpose. Maybe this young man was lazy. Maybe he lacked ambition. Maybe he felt a sense of entitlement and wanted to live the life of the idle rich. There is something important that's missing in his psyche. He has no sense of purpose. There's a great baseball story about Yogi Berra, the catcher for the New York Yankees, and Hank Aaron of the Milwaukee Braves. The teams were playing in the World Series. And as Aaron came to the plate, Yogi was trying to distract him by saying, "Henry, you're holding the bat wrong. You're supposed to hold it so you can read the trademark." Aaron didn't say anything. But when the next pitch came, he hit it into the left field bleachers. And after rounding the bases and tagging up at home plate, Hank Aaron looked at Yogi Berra and said, "I didn't come up here to read." Understanding our purpose is a key to success in sports, in business, in relationships, and most importantly, in our walk with God. He has instilled in us a need for understanding our purpose. And sometimes we can be so busy about our lives that we forget the purpose of our lives. We are driven by the demands of life, not realizing that God always has a greater purpose. His purpose not only encompasses our lives, but the lives of those around us at home, at school, at work, in the community. And it's important to know and to live out God's purpose. In Exodus chapter 9, verse 16, God tells Pharaoh, "I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth." See, Pharaoh mistakenly thought that he was in control, but God put him in the place of being an Egyptian leader for his purpose. God has a purpose for everyone, even those who resist him. We see this later on in the Old Testament when over and over God refers to the evil king Nebuchadnezzar as my servant Nebuchadnezzar. See, he was God's tool to punish Israel for turning away from him. God will get the glory, no matter the person, because he is the giver of purpose in every life, whether they live for him or not. All people are made in the image of God, each one of us born with a purpose and calling that we can choose to discover or choose to ignore. We will find peace and courage when we sense by the Spirit that we are in the right place at the right time in our designated calling. The Apostle Paul wrote extensively about purpose. In 3 different passages, he talks about gifts of the Spirit or spiritual gifts. Paul was helping the earliest Christians identify their natural, God-given, and learned abilities and talents so that they could use them for God's glory. We serve a God who is a loving Father, and fathers want the very best for their children. Fathers want their children to be healthy and happy and prosperous, and God is no different. After the Israelites were deported into captivity in Babylon, God sent a message to their leaders by way of a letter from the prophet Jeremiah, and you may be surprised by some of its content. It reads in part in Jeremiah 29, beginning in verse 4, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also," he says in verse 7, "seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper." Even in their exile, God was teaching his people the principles of contentment and purpose. He didn't want them to experience a miserable existence, pining away for their homeland, even though they were living in a country that was not their home. And as we live today in a world that is not our home, it is only through discovering the peace of contentment and the peace of purpose that we are going to thrive as God's people. God bless you.